Hello and welcome to Inside Egypt. I'm Sami Zeidan. It's the fastest shipping route between Europe and Asia and one of the Egyptian government's principal sources of hard currency. And now the Suez Canal is set for expansion. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi announced a $4 billion project this week to boost the canal's shipping capacity, cut transit times and help Egypt's ailing economy. Well, at present, the canal allows for one-way traffic with occasional room for ships to pass each other. But after the project's completion, ships will be able to go both ways for nearly half of the canal's 162 kilometres. Well, Sisi says the project will receive no funding from abroad, and he hopes the cost will be offset by ordinary Egyptians. He said, "We want all Egyptians to hold shares in this project," adding, "We will lift our country on our shoulders. We will not abandon it or lose it." Well, Sisi's also said the military will oversee the Suez project. It's in concert with an expanding military role in Egypt's economy. Well, much of the Egyptian military's financial dealings are unknown. Its budget is secret and its industries are unaudited and untaxed. In November, Sisi decreed in emergency cases, government ministries could skip a bidding process and instead award development contracts to a company of their choosing. Well, according to local news reports, at least 6 major infrastructure contracts worth more than $1.5 billion went to the military between September and December of last year. Economic analysts estimate the military's holdings account as much as 40% of the Egyptian economy. Let's bring in our guests joining us today. We have from London, Omar Ashour, author and senior lecturer in Middle East politics and security studies at the University of Exeter. From Seattle, Marwa Maziad from the University of Washington and columnist for Almasry Alyoum. And from Byblos on the phone, Sami Nader, economist and columnist for Al Monitor's Lebanon Pulse. Good to have you with us. If I could start with Marwa, looking at what the Egyptian president has done so far, cutting public spending on subsidies, pouring money into mega projects that can actually bring revenue, does it sound like a solid economic plan to you?
I think looking at this project, we have to analyze the political goal, the economic goal, and also the strategic security goal from it.
Well, let's start just with the economic goal. How do you analyze it in that respect?
Well, the military in Egypt has played a role in the economy like any other modernizing state. This was the situation post World War II. Where the state is taking the role, assuming a role of modernization and economic development. My comparative case is always Turkey and the role of the military there. Militaries in these countries first started with this welfare rhetoric. The state is doing these mega projects in order to steer the economy. But as in the case of Turkey in particular, eventually with market economy, their pension fund that was supposed to be just for the officers totally privatized and became a component of the market and still playing with nationalist rhetoric as to raise above other competitors. I think we're witnessing a transformation in the way the armed forces are dealing with their economic quote-unquote empire. Traditionally, they were only using the nationalist rhetoric of providing for the Egyptians, welfare state rhetoric of the state assuming the role and centralized economic role. I think now they are doing this kind of getting away from the ambiguity of the role of the military as a state component into the supervisor of other private companies, Egyptian and maybe international.
Okay,
even,
so a bit of transformation perhaps going on.
Forces.
All right, we'll come back to that point. If I could bring Sami Nader into the discussion, though, looking at the funding process of these mega projects like the Suez Canal expansion, is it going according to plan?
The problem with the funding is where this money will come from. Counting on the FDI, the foreign direct investment, is not enough. The other sources of revenue is other funding through direct participation from the public, and there are doubts if there enough level of confidence that will push people, ordinary people, to take shares, and still this is not enough. I mean, another idea that were discussed is to impose kind of taxes on Egyptians living outside, and this, I think, it will still more problems that will bring a solution. Third, you have the capitals or the money that could come from the Gulf countries. And but I mean, here you have a lot of projects, and the amount of funds are limited. This is one. Second, when talking about funds, what puts into question is the corporate governance rule and framework that keeps the investors, and this is not ensured, given that we're still in the framework of the old centralized economy, where the major player is the state and the army.
Right. I think we'll have to thank Sami Nader there for his contribution. Unfortunately, the quality of that line is not as good as we hoped. So let's thank Sami Nader there, and let's move on. Omar Ashour, is the one-year timeline for this project realistic?
I think it's not realistic. I think finishing it in that would be pretty much a miracle. However, I mean, there is no one who will hold the manager of this project accountable. There is no really a parliament that oversees the project at the moment. The bidding process was
Sisi is the
by
parliament right now, isn't he? He has legislative as well as executive authority.
Yeah, it's pretty much an authoritarian system in a sense that he came by, you know, there is a problem with the military institution at the moment. It's first time since the establishment of the republic, or since Nasser's in 54, you have the military command is the most dominant economic player and the most dominant political player, and that did not happen even under Nasser and under Mubarak. You know, the presidency, when they usually got into a political struggle with the head of the military establishment, the presidency under Nasser versus Amr, you know, Nasser used to win against Amr, the head of the military command, and he killed him in the end. You know, when Fawzi got the clash with Sadat, you know, Fawzi, the Minister of Defense, ended up in jail. And even when Abu Ghazala under Mubarak had a bit of, it was not even a struggle, it was more of tensions, he was sidelined and marginalized. But now, since 2011, you had the military command represented by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces as a superior player. So ousting President Mubarak in 2011, and then ousting President Morsi in 2013, and then appointing a third president, Adli Mansour, in 2013, and then becoming one of them, one of the SCAF figures, who's not the most decorated or not the most senior, became their representative really in the presidency. But that also has its parallel in the economic dimension. Under Mubarak, there was this diversity within the economic sphere. The two big tycoons was, on the one hand, the military establishment, mostly to appease them and to push them away from politics. But you had also this neoliberal major businessmen represented by Jamal Mubarak and his allies like Ahmed Izz. And all of those guys were playing with the market economy, and the military was seeing them as encroaching more and more on their economic benefits. And
all right, so
this is one of the
it sounds like you think we're losing that window for private sector business. And before we come, I will come to that point, but Marwa, the benefits of some of these projects, so we were talking about expanding the Suez Canal or building tens of new cities in the desert. The benefits of these mega projects will take years to trickle down to the grassroots, won't they? What happens in the meantime? What sort of government plan is there out there to help people in the short term?
I think the momentum itself is actually gaining some of these immediate responses. So imagine if, I think I want to go back to this idea of why is this project even revealed right now? And the political goal is not divorced from the economic activities. Politically, Sisi's government is responding to this notion or label of a mega national project that can rally the Egyptians and mobilize them and motivate them and give them hope for the future. And I think he's responding to that by creating the the buzz around the project that could, in another reading, be just an expansion of the Suez Canal. It could have been an understated expansion. It's just more of the same. But I think he's expanding on the notion of expansion by creating this sentiment that this is the new dam or the new pyramid, or all of these this rhetoric around it. Now, Mubarak experimented with that with the Toshka project, and that Toshka project in the Western Desert did not succeed, did not pull off. But at the beginning, it was a way of creating this buzz. I think with this project, I disagree that 1 year is not sufficient for what they are actually setting themselves to do. I think what they're setting themselves to do is maybe small, and then it's all the talk around it that will create a sentiment that, oh, I can get a job around there. I can move from the valley, from Cairo and the Delta to this area. So in a sense, the trickle down is already happening once you start seeing that there could be companies, the logistics, the notion that this area would be so developed, people would start getting excited about being part of that.
Marwa, they're seeing some trickle down clearly starting sooner rather than later. But let's look at some of the other, let's call it immediate policies that the president has embarked on to date. He's cut subsidies, prompting price rises in basics like fuel and electricity. Sisi also introduced new taxes on property, capital gains and stock market dividends. Now, the changes aim to rein in the budget deficit and debt to GDP ratio. In May, you might recall, Egypt's Trade and Industry Minister said debts had exceeded 100% of GDP. Let's bring in Omar Ashour into the discussion. Do you see here, is there some gain, more gain versus pain for perhaps the lower economic classes of Egypt in the short term from some of these changes that have been brought in?
I think we'll have to wait and see, because you have one player here, one dominant player in the economic sector that has no accountability and has no oversight. So whatever the results will be, whether positive or negative, nobody will hold him accountable and review that.
What about the government's projections? Are they not a source of hope, at least? The government's projecting the budget deficit will fall from 12% last year to 10% for this budget year, and GDP falling to 74.5% by 2017. How solid are those projections in giving you hope, for example?
I mean, I would say they are optimistic, but the thing is, again, there is no accountability for the government on one hand, and the government is part of the coalition that is ruling the country at the moment. It was appointed by the group that has the dominant or dominance over the political scene and over the economic scene. And when you talk about the details of that project, I mean, we didn't see a real plan. You saw some announcements, some rhetoric, some rallying around the nationalistic Nasser-style flag on the one hand, but also no details. You know what they were saying. You know, the 72 kilometers that they are going to dredge or even dig. Doing that in a year, I think it will be that alone. You know, not speaking about the industries around the whole sector, not speaking about the development of 3 other extensions of cities and of governorates. I think it's extremely ambitious, but again, in a year, if you came out and say, you know, after Sisi did not deliver on your promises, who will be able to do that?
All right,
that has been consistent with the military policies.
You made a lot of points there. Let's take them to Marwa. Marwa, you're slightly more optimistic. But at the end of the day, when you look at these projects, aren't they basically a continuation of a sort of public sector, unaccountable public sector dominated economy?
I am reading this as actually a change from the idea that the armed forces is part of the public sector, is part of the state, into the privatization of the assets and the armed forces as a conglomerate. And I keep
how do you see that, though, Marwa? Forgive me to interrupt you. How do you see that when we're hearing from local reports, a lot of the projects have been given to the armed forces themselves? They look like, and they're overseeing projects rather than the civilian authority overseeing them.
So I think it's a complex story, I have to say. But as I explained, this case of Turkey, where OYAK was the Armed Forces Pension Fund, that at the time of rapid market liberalization back really in the early 70s, because even Turkey started before Egypt, the military as a class felt threatened at the time with the new emerging entrepreneurs, and there was a law of OYAK that gave them some assets to basically run their own pension fund. At the beginning of this, it was very ambiguous. They were representing themselves as public money and then as representative of the state in a very ever-changing market economy. So they are the net, the safety net. Some of that has been what Egypt has been saying for the past 3 decades. Until there was a moment when OYAK decided to act as a complete private entity, of course assuming all the money it already accumulated, and then acted as a conglomerate, as one among many in the market. And since then, it became the fourth biggest holding with many companies, but keeps emphasizing that it's a private for-profit as a pension fund that invests in the
these are
Turkish
expectations,
economy.
are they not, Marwa? These are
enabled-
your expectations at this point. Are there any actual concrete indications that this is where the Egyptian military will go?
This is my research. This is my research. So some of the interviewing I have been doing tells me that there is a new formula and rhetoric for even representing these very economic activities of the armed forces. So
perhaps we should also recap now and look at some of the other ways President Sisi is considering to boost the Egyptian economy. And we might recall that since May, Sisi has met 3 times with, for example, the Peruvian international economist Hernando de Soto, pictured here. Now, he's given Sisi a plan to register the assets of ordinary Egyptians in an effort to help bring the black market into the formal economy. The plan aims to win public trust through cutting bureaucracy. De Soto predicts such reforms could more than double economic growth within 5 years of implementation. Omar Ashour, do you see that sort of plan coming about, where you'll have the black market brought into the formal economy, where you'll have perhaps the optimistic projections of Marwa, where even the military own or run assets become part of the private sector?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, the military needs to have an incentive to become competent economic administrators. And so far, if in an environment where there is no oversight, no transparency, and very limited competition, then there is no incentive to become a competitive economic administrator.
Could not the incentive, if I've understood Marwa, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but could not the burden of running such an economy itself become the incentive in the long run for them to follow the so-called Turkish model?
I think there's a major gap between, it's quite misleading to just take Turkey possibly in the 80s or the 70s and apply to 2014 now. Mainly because the level of competence on one hand and the level of development that the military economic administrators, and then the level of oversight as well. We're talking about some of the regulators that happened, especially after 2003 in Turkey, will never be accepted by the military in Egypt. And I think one of the colleagues, the leftist journalist, was in one of the press conferences with the general who was in charge of the economic portfolio in the SCAF. And he basically laid out what's happening in Turkey. And the response of that general was, this is our sweat, meaning the economic bonanza is our sweat, and we are going to protect it with our blood. So this is when you start to push a little bit for oversight and transparency, you get the weapons being raised. And in that environment, how are you going to compete, or how are you going to enhance the economic performance? I think the only incentive for that is to somehow gather more revenues in the country.
I can see she's checking her head. Very, very briefly, Marwa, did you want to come back on some of that?
Yeah, I think I'm not comparing Egypt 2014 to Turkey 2017. In fact, I was trying in a very brief overview say how Turkey went
I wasn't
from
saying
the
that. I was saying
until 2014. So I'm actually in this quote that you mentioned, Omar, about our sweat and our work, I read that as as a way of transforming the assets into a private conglomerate that is money-making, that is one among other players within the market.
Okay,
now,
all
with
right.
the development that happened
How? You have
politically-
no taxation. You have no taxation. You've got preferential customs rate. You've got preferential exchange rate. You don't buy the dollar with the right amount. You know, the treasury pays the rest. You confiscate pieces of land and never pay the treasury back. You have an army of laborers who never get paid and have no rights. You have all this economic empire, and then you're talking about the Turkish model. I think in that context it would be a joke to talk
Okay,
about
Omar, give her in a few seconds, Marwa, because we don't go on endlessly on this point.
Yeah, I'm saying that I agree with these points. Where are the taxes? Where is the oversight? What kind of privilege you have as being state actors anyway? But I'm saying that this is the core of the economic system. If you go the 90s, the 2000s.
Okay, all right, guys,
No,
maybe this is a good time to move on a little bit. All right, let's recall that Sisi's Suez expansion project has prompted comparisons of him to former Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Of course, it was Nasser who nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, much to the distaste of Britain, Israel and France, which led, of course, to the Suez crisis. And Gamal Abdel Nasser was also responsible for state-led infrastructure projects like the building of the Aswan Dam, as well as the establishment of Helwan Steelworks, which subsequently became Egypt's largest enterprise, providing tens of thousands of jobs. Now, let's take the question perhaps now to Omar Ashour. Is there a lot of focus on Sisi right now? Whenever we talk about the economy, the economic policy, the focus is on what Sisi has said. I'm sure you know his latest speech he gave, Hatadfa'u, that he's going to make people pay. Is this somehow a deliberate strategy to sort of put him in this sort of nationalistic role as Gamal Abdel Nasser?
I think it is. It's a very, as Marwa mentioned earlier, it's a very, very political economy, and in multiple ways. In one way, the propaganda dimension, the nationalistic sort of hero fixing the economy kind of approach, the grand projects approach. But in terms of realistic achievements, the history of public bonds and public shares in Egypt has been a disaster. I mean,
can the savior approach work?
3 times.
Can the savior approach, the national savior who's come to fix everything and everyone just needs to believe in him? Can it work today, as perhaps some would say it did for Gamal Abdel Nasser?
No, but this is coming on a country that is extremely divided, extremely polarized. You don't have the necessary social cohesion. Gamal Abdel Nasser rallied many Egyptians, with few exceptions, but many Egyptians, mainly because there was the hegemony of the British, the colonialism, the Israel, and so on and so forth. But this is a very different dynamic. This is a guy who coordinates with Israel and lays siege on Gaza. This is a guy who just
we've got only about a minute and a half left. I want to give Marwa an opportunity here. Who is the team, if there is a team, behind Sisi? I mean, is it one man who is doing everything? Do we know the full details of who his economic advisors and cabinets and all the people he's meeting, economists from around the world? How much do we know about who's rewriting Egypt's economy right now?
I don't know the team behind him right now, but I know that there were even conflicts around the campaign itself. The economic part of his program, some were trying to go into this kind of the state provider rhetoric, socialist rhetoric, but then some were veering towards have the armed forces be a player among many because it's a capitalist economy and we have to usher people into them. That's why I'm reading all this talk about Hatadfa'u, you'll pay either way, as a way of getting Egyptians to not be too dependent on the state. So I don't see it as a Nasser time at all.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there because we are running out of time. Let's thank our guests, Omar Ashour and Marwa Maziad. And remember, Al Jazeera has extensive and continuing coverage of what's happening in Egypt, on air and online. I'm Sami Zeidan. Thanks for watching. For now, it's goodbye.